thank you to Graham Linehan, a television writer, and Helen Stannerland, a software developer, for agreeing to speak to the committee. Graham and Helen, a transcript will be taken and the session will be broadcast live. Our witnesses who have been banned from Twitter will be asked to share their thoughts on content moderation. The purpose of this session is not to come to a judgment on Mr. Linehan's or Ms. Stannerland's actions online, nor is it to come to a view on transgender issues. It is to hear from those who have personal experience of what they feel is the threat to freedom of expression online. Hearing from people with such a perspective is essential to this inquiry, and we have ensured that a range of opinions have been heard across panels. Finally, may I please remind all participants in today's sessions that under the House's sub judice resolution, live or imminent court cases should not be referred to. I also ask participants to avoid naming individuals involved in online discussions. Mr. Linehan and Ms. Stannerland, thank you very much for appearing before the committee today. We have four main areas of questioning. I will start by getting an understanding of what we mean by freedom of expression and the extent to which it should be restrained in broad terms. Then we will discuss your own experience of content moderation, online behaviour, and the role of education and behaviour protocols. After that, we will explore the difference between online and offline behaviour. And finally, we will look at aspects of public policy relating to proposed online harms legislation. So, okay, can I start by exploring what we mean by freedom of expression? In written and oral evidence to this inquiry, many witnesses have argued that the right to freedom of expression should be unfettered. It should be a right to say anything that is legal. I think at the start of this inquiry, that is a position with which I had a great deal of sympathy. Nobody has a right not to be offended. You can always hit the block button. Many, though, say that they can see the case for further but very limited restrictions on freedom of expression online, but they should only apply in those cases where expressing something may give immediate physical harm, give rise to immediate physical harm to others. So the restriction should be limited in that one very specific sense. And others go further, and particularly in relation to platforms, think a much lower barrier should apply, and that content that is likely to cause emotional or psychological harm to others should be banned or its reach restricted. So can we start by sort of discussing that? At this stage, in very general terms, where do you think the line should be drawn? Ms. Stannerland, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I think like you, I've actually moved my position slightly. I, being a woman online, and fully understand how words are used to try and silence women. I've been subject to rape threats or just simple harassment, sort of low-level sexual harassment. I used to be far more maybe conservative in what I think should be allowed. But then having been part of a fight where actually I've been vilified for talking, and finally suspended from Twitter for what I believe is simple political advocacy for women. I think I can now see that this is an incredibly complex area, and getting the balance right is very, very, very difficult. But I think the goal in society is to maximise freedom of expression for all groups, across all groups. And so we do need restrictions to prevent people from being silenced because of the atmosphere that they're in. But we also have to be extremely careful that these restrictions don't themselves become another way of silencing people.
Thank you. Mr. Linehan, your initial response.
Sure, it's Mr. Linehan, by the way.
Linehan, I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. I couldn't really say it better than Helen there. I'm not so much a expert on solutions to the problems that are arising now because of social media, but I do think that we sometimes look at it through a lens that kind of fails to take into account the huge societal changes that social media has already wrought. These need to be addressed as well in taking into account in addressing freedom of speech online. You know, at the moment, my big concern and my big worry is that women's rights are essentially seen as transphobic. And that on Twitter, Facebook, and even Mumsnet is getting people banned and shutting down a discussion that is absolutely essential. So yes, that's where I would stand on that issue.
Okay, well, let's explore that a bit further, because you talked about the climate that social media has created, which has changed things. I mean, it clearly has. So let's look at that a little bit more. The recent TV drama It's a Sin about AIDS in the 1980s attracted huge audiences. I should say, for full disclosure, that I'm a gay man, but this drama has been praised by and has made an impact on people from all backgrounds. What It's a Sin showed was that the reason young people couldn't come out as gay was because of a climate that was created by other people exercising their right of freedom of expression to attack homosexuality and condemn the way that they led their lives. Gay people were told that they lived in a cesspit of their own making, they were paedophiles, and that they deserved everything they got. So in exercising their right to express themselves freely, some people were creating a climate in which gay people could not express themselves in that most fundamental way of just being who they were. They were driven into the closet and they died lonely deaths. So to your point, let's imagine that social media had existed in the 1980s and freedom of expression online was the subject before us. And to be absolutely clear, I'm not asking you to accept a parallel with the debate about trans rights now. I'm trying to find an example of an issue that existed pre-social media and thinking about how social media rules might apply now. And this is an area where my thinking has developed during the inquiry, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. Do you see that there are two aspects to freedom of expression at play here? The right of any individual to speak freely and express themselves within the law, and the right of an individual to enjoy a climate where they can freely express who they are. Helen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. This is, as I've already said, this is a very complex issue, and it is definitely a balance of rights. And I would go even further, actually. I would say that you also need to strike a balance between people politically advocating for their own rights where it might infringe or it might come into conflict with that other group. And I think that there are things that you can say under the terms of political advocacy, which you might not say to an individual person. And I think that that's not very well moderated at all in society at large and on social media.
Very interesting. Mr. Linehan.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question in the sense that what you're describing about people not allowed to be themselves and so on is exactly what is happening to feminists and lesbians at the moment. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, the Pride March in London was disrupted by a group of lesbians. They lay down in front of the march and stopped it. And the reason they did this is because there's simply no other way of getting their message out. This is complete desperation, an incredibly brave thing to do for those women, but there's really nothing else they can do. They've tried everything. They've tried discussing it with LGBT leaders, and no one is taking them seriously. Everyone is dismissing their concerns. So I think that the real parallel that you're talking about is not with trans people, but with women and lesbians at the moment. They are, at the moment, they have to be anonymous, or their employer will be targeted. You've seen what's been happening to academics and all, people in all different walks of life, and they shouldn't. Their concerns and their worries are completely valid, and they shouldn't be frightened to put their name to them.
Okay, so, the point I'm getting, I want to come back to Helen on this because she said something quite interesting, is there's a bit of difference between whether you're generally advocating a point and whether you're engaging with somebody online. So you would have thought that, for example, the kind of offensive comment that I described is certainly something that social media companies would be perfectly justified in preventing a user from targeting at an individual.
Yes, I mean, I think there are easy examples and there are difficult examples. And if you look, say, at Twitter's examples of content moderation, the examples they use are quite straightforward. However, when they do moderate people, especially women, and ban them, the tweets that they ban them for aren't anywhere near as straightforward as that. For example, I advocate for women's sex-based rights. I think that women should be free to play sport and undress away from people who were born male. Some people believe that the line should be drawn at gender identity. However, it's very difficult for me to advocate for this because anything I say in this area gets called transphobic. And then once you've been called transphobic, I get mass reported, or I used to get mass reported all over the time. And I think, again, there needs to be a balance, and there needs to be an understanding that people are able or should be allowed to advocate in their own political interests without being silenced by cries of hate and bigots.
Yeah, I think we're talking, we'll come back to this. I think we talked about behaviour rather than advocacy and argument. It's the way in which things are expressed and the appropriate way in which they're expressed in social media and to different types of audiences. But that's something we can return to. Baroness Fuscombe.
Thank you. My question really gets a little bit more granular in relation to the limits of rights to freedom of expression online. So I want to ask you your view on the Law Commission's consultation on criminalising communications which are, quotes, likely to cause emotional or psychological harm. But before I ask you, I think it's important for viewers and listeners to know that we do have rights which are protected by the Human Rights Act and by Article 10 of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. But it's also protected, of course, under common law. But Article 10 is incredibly broad in terms of what it encompasses in terms of caveats for what is criminal, what is not, what is allowable, what is not. So that's why the Law Commission have carried out this consultation. They haven't reported yet, but it would be really interesting to know whether you think their reference to likely to cause emotional or psychological harm is helpful, is sufficiently broad, or maybe too subjective. Graham, maybe we'd like to hear from you first.
It's difficult because what is considered psychological harm by at least two younger generations at the moment, is things like stating biological facts. So the statement isn't very helpful in the sense that it will change completely from person to person what's considered psychologically harmful. But so, you know, I mean, the thing is, may I read out a statement that sort of explains my background and where I'm coming from in this?
We want to ask you about, in the next question, we want to ask about your experiences of on Twitter. Oh, okay. I think that's the point at which you can speak for your own experiences.
Yes. Well, the psychological harm thing, you will see that it is now like. I'll give you an example. Twitter's terms and conditions say that you are not allowed to, in quote unquote, reduce people to their genitals. This means literally that if you, there's a Canadian feminist, Megan Murphy, who was talking about a trans-identified male who was suing immigrant women of color because they wouldn't perform cosmetic services on his genitalia. She said the words, "That's him." Now, this was at a time when he was going under a male and a female name, and she said, "That's him." Twitter used that moment, "That's him," to ban her completely from the platform. This person is still on Twitter and is still filing these cases against these women. And again, you will see a similar thing play out. Women are trying to talk about their sex-based rights and are consistently being banned, whereas men are sending death threats, rape threats, even blue tick accounts, which are the kind of verified accounts on Twitter of people who have some sort of profile. Even blue tick accounts are saying these disgusting, terrible things, and they don't get banned. So, you know, the problem is the opaque nature of Twitter. We don't know.
Okay, and I just want to stop.
Yeah, I was going to ask about definition, really, the definition of the Law Commission. Are you suggesting, Graham, that that's really not going to help? I think that's really what you're saying. It's not really a solution in terms of how you sensibly, if that's the right word, limit freedom of expression.
Yes, I think it may not be, because mores change, and what is acceptable one moment isn't the next. Like, I grew up under, you know, in the time of Mary Whitehouse, but it wasn't until this year that an episode of my show, The IT Crowd, was banned on Channel 4. And it's because the current generation, the generation coming up, is extremely censorious, very, very oversensitive, and simply can't deal with certain jokes or principles or ideas. They simply can't deal with them. So just because those generations have that doesn't mean they should be imposing it on the rest of us.
Okay, that's very helpful, because it's, in a sense, it's about, does the legislation ever keep up with cultural mores, which is, I think, is a perennial problem for a lot of issues. Helen, what are your thoughts on the law?
I think, sorry, thank you. I think it's very, very key to consider who gets to define what psychological harm is. Yeah. It's so important, because again, I can see this will absolutely be used as a tool of the powerful to silence the weak. And on top of that, you've also got the what are the fallouts of somebody being banned from social media because somebody has accused them of causing psychological harm. For women on Twitter being banned, especially in lockdown, it's very, very isolating. That, I mean, I know women who have suffered very badly with their mental health from suddenly being in an atmosphere where they have support and they can talk to other women, other people, to just being completely cut off, not allowed back on for the rest of their lives. Remember, for the rest of their lives, these women are no longer allowed to communicate with their friends, with their networks. That can cause immense psychological harm. So I think you've also got to think of what happens when somebody accuses someone of psychological harm.
Okay, thank you both very much. It's very helpful, and I think we'll hear more about the fact that it's for life and so on when we ask about the appeals process and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, and before we move on, let's just come back to Helen on a point she made there. So that the difficulty is defining psychological harm. It seems to me that you're not for a moment relaxed about people suffering psychological harm. And you clearly understand that it's an issue, but you say who defines psychological harm, and that's clearly important. Isn't the answer that expert psychologists define behaviour that's likely to cause psychological harm, and then we all go with it?
I think that it would, as if I haven't seen it written down, that's an excellent start. Yes, I think that's a much better start than allowing people themselves or advocacy groups maybe to say, well, we believe that somebody saying this to us is psychological harm. Yes, I think that would be an excellent starting point, but that the conversation should be had and that it should be extremely clear And there shouldn't really be that much room for subjectivity in it, because when it's subjective, then again, like I said, I have come to understand that all of these things can be used as a tool by the powerful to silence the weak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Baroness Buscombe. Lord McInnes.
Thank you very much. Inevitably, something that we've considered a lot during this inquiry has been policies around moderation and appeals. And we would like to learn today of your experience in terms of the transparency and fairness that you felt about Twitter's moderation policy and the appeals process that you entered. So perhaps, Helen, if you could start, just let us know your views on the process, both of moderation and of appeal.
I think Twitter is one of the most powerful technology companies in the world, and their appeals process is incredibly poor. It's very poorly done. So I can only imagine that it must be sort of purposeful, that they don't really want people to appeal. I think it's difficult for them, and I think it's costly. The appeals process is just dreadful. You're banned, and you're given an email saying this is what you're banned for. And remember, and I think this is very important, women are being banned for hateful content, and it has the word hate in it. Now, this is, I think, a very damaging accusation that Twitter is making. So you do really, really want to be able to address this and say, well, can you explain to me what it is, how you've come to the conclusion that what I've said about, say, single-sex spaces is actually hateful? But I mean, I don't even know if your appeal goes to a person, because you get the same answer back each time. I've appealed 5 times now, this one, and I've had exactly the same answer back each time. There is a process that people have heard about from word of mouth, where you can go via the Better Business Bureau in America, and they can supposedly get somebody on it, like a person on it. And some people have had success appealing through the Better Business Bureau. So it does show that, you know, there's a little bit of who you know going on there as well. But for most normal people or ordinary people, once you have been banned, that is it, and for life. Yeah, I will never be, and not only will I never get my Twitter account back, I am never allowed another Twitter account, ever. I am banned from the public square for the rest of my life.
And the transparency around that process was purely an email then?
Yes.
And your examination of the policies thereafter, the Twitter policies, you had access to those, and the examples that they use, you mentioned before, tend to be quite clear cut.
Yes, absolutely. The hateful content focuses largely on incitement to violence and threats and attacks. Now, I don't believe that asking a question whether male-born people should have access to women's changing rooms is in any way incitement to violence or a threat or an attack. But that's what Twitter has put it under, and that's it. There is no comeback.
And that was the argument you used in your 5 appeals then?
Yes, well, I've tried a number of different arguments, but each time it's fallen on deaf ears.
And have you considered using the Better Business Bureau?
I have been through the Better Business Bureau, and that was also denied.
Okay, thank you. And Graham, your own experience?
Well, I used the Better Business Bureau, but while I was involved in this, I heard from a man who was banned at the same time as me, Stuart Campbell, who does the website Wings Over Scotland. Mm-hmm. And we were told that the orders to ban myself and him came at the same time and came from the London office. And when questioned about it, they said they're not getting back on again. So I found this out after I'd sent my appeal, you know. So it was I think a purely political decision to get rid of me.
And in terms of transparency, apart from that hearsay, you haven't heard anything further than emails that may be automated or not?
No, nothing at all. The only thing they did was they gave the Guardian a quote about why I was banned, but they didn't tell me. And the Guardian didn't ask me for a quote on that story either.
So the Public Affairs Office of Twitter commented to newspapers.
As Helen says, it's a way of reinforcing the image of you as hateful. You know, I was told that I was misusing the platform because I had a number of Twitter accounts, one of which had been dormant for over 7 years. Another was one I used to do memes with and stuff like that. They weren't. There's no provision in Twitter's rules. You're allowed to have different accounts, but for some reason it was decided that this was somehow nefarious and used to paint a picture of me.
Sorry. And I just understand. So then, when you were banned, it was on the basis of sort of systematic use of Twitter rather than specific examples given, or were you never clear on that?
I was never clear on it. My last tweet that I was told I was banned, that they sent me I think a screenshot of it, was when I said men aren't women. That was the statement that I made. Men aren't women, though, I said, you know. So it's you know, actually that's what I was covering in my opening statement that I'd still like to read.
So there would be a real lack of transparency then.
There's no transparency. They operate on a complete. There's also within, you know, even when you're not banned, there's certain things they do to try and limit the reach that feminists and their allies have on Twitter, including things like deboosting, shadow banning. All these things are ways. I mean, when people share my blog online, it comes up under a thing saying, you know, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something like, "This is sensitive content. Are you sure you want to open it?" So there's a number of different things they use to suppress the voices of women on the platform, and those things are a complete mystery in terms of how they're applied.
So there's no clarity over de-amplification policies, or
no,
you know, your account or former tweets being in any way highlighted. No.
Yeah.
Could I add a little bit more to this? Not only is the appeals process untransparent, it's completely opaque how people actually get banned. We don't know what the rules around mass reporting are, but certainly I was targeted for mass reporting, people just calling for others to report me. We don't know what the, you know, I asked the question I was banned for. I must have asked 1,000 or so times, and I was never banned for it. But then at one point, I simply was banned for it. Yeah. So it's completely untransparent, and yet there are still tweets there, which I'm afraid I've got examples here. I think I won't show them here. I will send them to later. But they are actually advocating gun violence against women. These tweets were reported, and Twitter have come back saying, no, there is no violation of the rules here.
And just one final point from me, Chairman, if I may. And just asking then, therefore, do you feel there is obviously a tension between what is a public square and what is a business? How do you feel the balance should be in terms of policy and appeal process between the two? Maybe Graham first.
I just think it needs to be clear. It needs to be absolutely clear. Like, would it be helpful if I read just a little? This is not my statement, but this is one tweet. This was an account that had 10,000 followers, and this was the tweet they were banned for. It was a reply to someone in a conversation, and it said, "Male and female are biological sexes. We are talking specifically about biological sex and not gender, and I don't know any actual women who are offended by the word female. Some men who want to be thought of as women get mad about being reminded biological sex is real." Now that woman had 10,000 followers and has been banned for life, you know? So the thing is, people, when they're actually writing, they don't know what will get them banned or not. But it seems clear to us that when certain feminist accounts get over a certain number, they become a target, and they're often removed, you know, one way or another, you know.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's just totally opaque. It's totally opaque, and they can do whatever they like.
Which I suppose, if they're purely a private business, then they're capable of doing as a public square. Yeah. And Helen, just on that point.
Yes, I think when Twitter first started, I think that it was okay. You know, it was a private small business, and you know they needed to set their own rules. And because at that point we didn't even really know what it was. We didn't know what Twitter could necessarily do. But as time has gone on, and Twitter has pretty much of necessity become the monopoly, because it is going to be a monopoly, because social media is, because everyone wants to go where their friends are. But it has now become a monopoly. Policies, you know, politicians are on there, advocacy groups are on there. I think it's no longer appropriate to ban people. There should be proportional punishments, shall we say. I don't think banning women for the rest of their lives is at all proportionate. So I think what we need from Twitter, I think we need data, you know, just to see who is reporting, what's being reported. I think we need clarity over the rules. I do think we need independent adjudication, if, you know, for banning, so that people can go. And I think we also need clarity on who is on the panels making the rules. I think just transparency is key.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, well, look, that's really useful and helpful, because these are the issues that we are trying to get at, and you make some useful points, and we've got quite a lot of further questions we'd like you to help us with. Graham, I know that there are some things you want to say. Do you want to sort of address a couple of issues you would have liked to have said to the committee? Make it as brief as you can, though, because we do want to come back and ask you some more questions about these issues that you've already been helpful with.
I'll do my very best to rattle through it. Okay, I'm a writer. I've written several comedy programs, the most famous of which is probably Father Ted. But I'd ask you today to briefly take me seriously, because I believe the stakes could not be higher. Almost 4 years ago, I saw that feminists were being bullied, harassed, and silenced for standing up for their rights and for their children's rights. I decided to use my platform on Twitter to bring attention to what seemed to be an all-out assault on women, on their words, their dignity, and their safety. Also, I saw that vulnerable children were being fast-tracked onto a medical pathway that could carry severe long-term implications. My position is very simple. I believe everyone should be allowed to talk about these issues. In fact, I believe that it is a moral imperative that we do so. I'm talking about such matters as the scandals at the Tavistock, the confusing and misleading advice that Stonewall has been providing to institutions all over the UK regarding the nature of the Equalities Act, the issue of men in women's sports, in women's prisons, their rape crisis centres, the destruction of basic safeguarding principles that has led to all this, and the silencing and abuse of feminists, doctors, teachers, academics, and writers, anyone, in fact, who questions the fashionable American orthodoxy of gender identity ideology. For engaging in this debate, I've been the subject of a series of harassment campaigns, including vexatious legal actions, police visits, magazine articles misrepresenting my positions, threatening letters hand-delivered to my home, my wife's business address released online. Anything and everything has been tried to silence me and prevent people from hearing the reasonable fears many women have about the impact of this ideology on their sex-based rights. I've also lost work. As a result of my sudden financial insecurity, my marriage was placed under such a severe strain that my wife and I finally agreed to separate. Believe me, I would rather be writing a farce than living through one, but this is a very dangerous farce, one in which children's health and happiness are gambled on an ideology that makes no sense and yet is zealously and obsessively policed by misogynistic activists on platforms that empower them just as they disempower the women they abuse. But it's not just the platforms or their users that are preventing a debate. Around 3 years ago, I was among the initial signatories of a letter to Stonewall asking them to help lower the toxicity of the conversation around sex and gender and acknowledge the plurality of views on the subject. The letter was composed by Johnny Best, a gay man and longtime LGBT activist, and a majority of those initial signatories were either gay, lesbian, or trans. We wanted to see an end to women receiving death and rape threats for standing up for their sex-based rights. To that end, we asked Stonewall to commit to fostering an atmosphere of respectful debate rather than demonizing as transphobic those who wish to discuss or dissent from Stonewall's current policies. Stonewall flatly refused this appeal within the day and continued to dishonestly frame women standing up for their rights as an attack on trans rights. The petition has since been signed by over 11,000 people, many of them gay men and women, in despair of what is being done in their name. J.K. Rowling is only the latest and most high-profile figure to suffer the consequences of this fundamentalist view of the issue. The magazine Pink News, which is partly funded by Google, ran 42 stories on her in a single week. That's 6 stories a day. But there are thousands more women who are bullied and slandered and harassed into silence. These women, and they are mostly women, are not famous, and so even more vulnerable to the smear campaigns and targeted harassment that J.K. Rowling and myself have endured. And to briefly pause here, does anyone know what J.K. Rowling said that was transphobic? Can anyone produce any transphobic statements by her? You cannot, because there are none. As a survivor of domestic abuse, she wrote movingly about the importance of single-sex spaces to vulnerable women and children. She complained about the erasure of the word woman in many areas of civic life. And she pointed out correctly, in my view, that we are living through the most misogynistic period we have ever experienced. In place of evidence of her supposed transphobia, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of YouTube stars, Twitter trolls, mainstream media outlets, including the BBC, spreading a poisonous lie intended to blacken her name and serve as a warning to the women who might otherwise find the courage to echo her concerns. This silencing of women was the main reason I entered this fight. I knew the subject of gender was fraught, but I'm political by nature and I couldn't remain quiet in the face of such vicious misogyny. I presumed that when others saw what was happening, that they too would speak up and we would be able to force the debate our opponents were so desperate to avoid. I now realize that I was up against a much bigger beast than I thought. These platforms shape the debate and declare you untouchable when you refuse to play by their rules. The upshot is that many people presume that I am a bigot. These people also presume the same of J.K. Rowling and many other left-leaning, liberal and progressive women. If you believe that J.K. Rowling is transphobic, a woman who has devoted her work and much of her fortune to the vulnerable, the bullied, the forgotten, the abused, then you are under a spell. If you believe that men can fairly compete against women in their sports, including contact sports, then you are under a spell. If you believe that men will not go to the most extreme lengths to gain access to women and children, then you are under a spell. If you believe that children as young as 3 years old can agree to a procedure that puts them on a medical pathway for life, that arrests their natural puberty, and that has almost no scientific proof as to its efficacy as a treatment for dysphoria, then you are under a spell. Social media has created a through-the-looking-glass world which is robbing everyone of their ability to think. My final statement on Twitter, the straw that broke the camel's back, was simply, men are not women. A world where statements like men are not women is hate speech is a world on the brink of chaos. Feminists are just a canary in the coal mine in this upside down world where public discourse depends on the whims of a small group of men in Silicon Valley. Gender identity ideology began in American universities, is uncritically disseminated by the popular media, but social media companies and their users are the enforcers. People do not understand the extent to which they have been indoctrinated by this ideology. Women who oppose it are trying desperately to be heard. Helen is one example of thousands. I have heard from young lesbians who are frightened that their sexuality will have them labeled transphobic. I've heard from therapists unable to tell distraught children that their favorite author does not want them dead. I've heard from detransitioners who tell of young women being groomed by older men in trans youth groups. The reason you've not heard the things that I've heard is because the discourse is being shaped by trans rights activists. In place of reasoned arguments and democratic discussion, we have mantras like no debate and trans women are women. We have policies passing by stealth. We have bogus statistics about trans murder epidemics, and we have the unconscionable weaponizing of suicide for political ends. The discourse is broken, women's rights are being stripped away, our children are not safe, and we are not allowed to talk about it. Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Well, look, we were actually discussing, thank you for that, we were discussing some really serious issues that get to the heart of this. And
I guess what I wanted to put forward in that point is that this is a wider problem than social media companies.
No, I understand that.
But it's also like more mainstream media outlets. Like
okay, this is with all respect, this is an inquiry into freedom of expression online. Sure. At the end of which we make a series of specific public policy proposals, and that's what I now want to return to. You know, we're not here as a court of appeal to review any decisions that have been made by tech companies. We are here to think about how public policy in this area may develop. We are not speaker's corner. You've made your point. Now, what we'll do if we can is return to our questions, because we were saying some...
Sorry, Chairman, I've not been able to get in at all.
some interesting things. And
Am I not audible?
there's some I can't hear. Lord Lipsey, could you turn your? I think Lord Lipsey, your microphone's turned off. Lord Colville.
Yes.
My microphone isn't turned off, but I don't seem to be being heard. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
The next,
Can you hear
Lord
me?
Lipsey, sorry. The next question is from Lord Colville.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my question. I'm going to go back to this is an inquiry that's looking at expression online. We've already asked you about Twitter and your experiences of Twitter. We obviously looking at other platforms as well, and what the processes they're using for banning people. Facebook is obviously the biggest of the social media platforms. I think you've both at times been temporarily taken down from Facebook. It's very interesting to know the granular detail of what happened to you, because after all, we did hear last week from Alan Rusbridger, who's on the Facebook oversight board. You say these rules are being made by faceless men in Silicon Valley. Actually, there are both men and women, and we do know their names, and they are making the rules. So we're told for the oversight board. Helen, if you could explain to me in granular detail what was the process that happened at Facebook? Did you have when you had a post taken down?
I'm afraid I very rarely use Facebook. I only use it to catch up with my school friends, and I haven't had a post taken down. But I will say this, people use your banning from one platform to try and get you banned from other platforms. I have seen this. I've seen it used in Graham's case and a couple of other friends, people saying they were banned for hate from Twitter and writing to other platforms saying, why are you platforming these people? You should not be allowed. But that's all I have.
Okay, but Graham, you actually have had your post taken down from Facebook.
Yeah, it happens to me once a month.
Okay, will you explain to me just the process, because that's what we're very interested in. What actually happened initially when your post was taken down? Were you notified of it being taken down?
What happens is, I mean, I like Helen, I don't really use Facebook a lot. It's just like a kind of a lifeboat, really, after Twitter, which I just occasionally dip into. But all that happens is when you try to do something, you get a little announcement saying that you've been banned for 30 days.
Right. And have you tried to appeal against that process?
No, as I say, I don't really care about Facebook, so I never appealed. I just thought, oh, great, a good excuse not to use Facebook for 30 days.
I mean, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to add, but actually, a 30-day ban, that is, I think that's, in some cases, a far more proportional response. Because, say, on Twitter, sorry to go back to Twitter, it is my experience, you can get a 12-hour ban or a 7-day ban, and then you're banned for life. Yeah. So I think the 30-day is possibly more of a proportional response.
But may I say that in similarly to how in right-wing dictatorships, one thing they would often do to political enemies is they would pick them up off the street before an important vote and just bring them somewhere and just put them somewhere safe where they couldn't vote or couldn't participate in the political life of the country. That is essentially what's happening when you get a 30-day ban. For 30 days, you're being told you may not participate in the political life of the country. And I don't want to go into granular details of my last ban, but it was a mildly fruity, rude joke, rude point about a certain problem, which I think is the proliferation of pornography that I think is really having a terrible effect on the country. That was banned. And I know that the reason it's banned is not because it was offensive, it's because there are people watching my account and they try and spot anything that they can use to keep me quiet.
But Graham, you say that Facebook isn't particularly interesting or important to you. However, Facebook is the biggest social media platform in the world, so it's obviously very important to 2.5 million users.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And that is what we are looking at. You know, that the power of that platform. So, yes. I mean, I'm hoping that as somebody who has experienced that, you'll be able to talk to us. You haven't done the appeals process yourself, but Facebook says that it is responding to the lack of transparency, which both of you have spoken about. It has set up this oversight board. We do know who the members of that oversight board are, and their rulings are published. Indeed, as I said, Richard Bushbridger came before us last week. Is that surely not a way to go forward in order to bring sort of transparency to other platforms as well?
Yes, may I add something to that as well? It would be nice if I was able, for instance, as a highly, controversial figure, to be allowed to, to inform someone that you will get people mass reporting me. You will get people, like I know that the chair has received hundreds of letters accusing me of all sorts of things this week. But it would be nice if with this I was able to warn you and say, hey, you're going to be getting a lot of letters sent to you that say I'm the worst thing that's ever happened. I can't do that to social networks because it's so it's so opaque and it's so hard to actually get to speak to someone. But what you described sounds great. That's all I would like. But the problem at the moment, to move back to Twitter just for a second, is that this thing they have in their terms and conditions that you are not allowed to quote unquote reduce people to their genitals. That is a way of simply forcing people to not tell the truth. It's forcing people to lie. So there's something very, very broken at the heart of Twitter, and I think that needs to be addressed before you can address panels and so on that sort out the problem. It's right at the root of Twitter's terms.
But Facebook particularly, and maybe we can talk about Twitter in our report. They do publish what their content moderation policies are and the appeal policies. There is that transparency in there. Is that what you're saying? You want to see happening across the piece with platforms?
But I'd also like to be able to challenge them. I mean, if you're the tweet I just read out to you is simply a list of biological facts. There was nothing in it that was aggressive or rude. There was no misgendering. There was nothing in it that could be seen as controversial. And yet, that woman, her 10,000 followers, her networks, her support groups, just gone like that because Twitter, arbitrarily decided that they didn't like her. That's the thing I'm most worried about.
So what would you like doing about what happened to when you think mass reporting is going to be happening?
It would be nice to say, hey, I'm not a bigot. The things I'm saying are perfectly reasonable. Everything I've said to you today is essentially what I believe. I think it's what the vast majority of people in this country believe. And yet I'm considered, a Nazi by these social media platforms who will do everything they can to keep me off them.
There's another platform which you've also been banned from, Medium. Was that experience different from what happened at Facebook and Twitter? I mean, it's quite a thing to be banned by three separate platforms, and all of whom have different policies, and they still came to the same conclusion.
Well, Medium is a part of Twitter, so they had the same thing. But I have all my I think I have my Medium pieces. I also have my Twitter archive. Someone warned me just before I got taken down that it looked likely they were going to come for me. So I downloaded my whole Twitter history, and I can send that to anyone. There to run a search on keywords or see if you can find any abusive statements or anything like that. I stand by absolutely everything I did on those platforms. All I've ever done is argue for women's rights and argue that they're being stripped away at the moment. And You know, Medium doesn't like it, Twitter doesn't like it, Instagram doesn't like it, Facebook doesn't like it. None of them like women standing up for their rights or their allies standing up for their rights.
The fact that so many of those platforms actually have come to the same conclusion does seem to be extraordinary if you have done nothing to harass people.
Yes, but there you're doing exactly what I call the enforcers, the users on Twitter. You're using the fact that I've been banned as evidence. But I would, it's the same as J.K. Rowling. The idea that J.K. Rowling is transphobic or a bigot is like a bit of mind control that's spread all over the world. Most people assume it's true, and have you ever seen one transphobic statement from her? There's never been anything. And yet she is absolutely vilified. Her name, a poster was taken down in Edinburgh train station saying, "I love J.K. Rowling," because it was considered hate speech. I mean, this is what's happening. You've got to understand. Another thing to bear in mind is that the employees at Silicon Valley companies, the trans-identified employees are like the percentage of trans-identified employees is a complete reversal of the amount of trans-identified people you find in real life.
Okay.
So it is a political and ideological movement masquerading as a moral.
But what I'm interested in is the way that the tech platforms are actually responding to that, because after all, that is what our report is going to have to look at. Surely these are private companies, and so they should be allowed to set their own terms and conditions for the users online.
But as I say, I read you out a tweet there that the woman is banned for. There's nothing in it. She didn't break any of the rules that I can see. All she said was that, male and female is different. There's gender and sex is different. Some trans-identified men get annoyed when you remind them that biological sex is real. How on earth is that a banning offence?
So they clearly did think you had broken their rules. Is your concern that you?
No, I'm talking about Tibby, this girl who was banned.
That they had broken this rules. Is your concern then that there isn't enough transparency in what those rules are or how they're enforced across the piece?
Yes, exactly. I mean, as I say, like one thing that happened was Meghan Murphy was banned for something that was a historical thing she did. They went back to find a tweet that she tweeted before they changed the terms and conditions, and they banned her for that tweet. So something to compare it to a little bit is Trump. Like Trump, when Trump was president and making Twitter millions and billions of pounds, he broke their terms and conditions 100,000 times. Every time he tweeted, he broke a term and condition. He threatened violence against people, and they never banned them. They only banned them when, he was losing power and they thought they thought he'd outlived his usefulness to them. But it's that kind of arbitrary decision that, at the moment, I mean, I don't really care about Trump. I'm delighted to see him not tweeting anymore because his tweets were so incendiary and horrible, and have gotten a lot of people into terrible trouble. But feminists should be allowed to talk about their sex-based rights. It is not transphobic.
Can I add something there that actually I think you said, which was surely the tech companies should be allowed to set their terms and conditions. I'm actually not at all sure that they should be. They may be at the beginning, but now they are. I mean, I think Twitter is one of the smaller platforms, and I think it has 350 million users, 16 million users in Britain. I think they have a moral responsibility to be fair. And I think in being able to set their own terms and conditions, I'm not sure we should be looking to tech companies in Silicon Valley or wherever as being the sort of arbiters of free speech of people in the UK. I'm not at all certain about that. However, I understand that, it's a difficult thing to wrest away from them. So at least if we have transparency and clarity, data around, as I said, mass reporting, who's reporting what, and how the decisions are taken, I think at least then you have some knowledge that maybe things are fair.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you, Lord Colwell. Right, we've only got a few minutes left and quite a few more questions. So if we have reasonably questions and answers, Graham, I don't know whether it's reassuring to you or not, but I actually only received, I think, about 6 emails in the run-up to this meeting. I think the committee may have received a few more, so it wasn't it wasn't an email version of a Twitter storm. Though people do feel very strongly about this issue, I completely acknowledge that. Lord Bishop, the Bishop of Worcester.
Thank you both very much indeed for your evidence so far, which has been really helpful. I want to broaden things out a bit to think about online versus offline behaviour in general. I mean, it is alleged, this is not suggesting not anything personal, but it is alleged that people are inclined to behave worse online than they are in person. Do you think that's true? And if so, why? Helen, you're nodding. Do you want to say something?
Yes, I think it's very clear. If you spend any time at all really on Twitter, I think it's very clear that people can be maybe a worse version of themselves. In large part, this is because Twitter does allow anonymity. You can set up as many accounts as you want unless you've been banned. You can set up as many accounts as you like, and you can be as anonymous as you like, and you can send pretty much whatever you like, because if you've just got a small account that you've set up in order to just be abusive towards somebody, you can. But further to that, there are still things that people would say to me with a full name there, even with sort of, verified accounts. And I do think that this is in part because of the sort of, I want to say that the mob mentality, that you're there and you're egged on, and you feel, because there are hundreds of people saying the same thing as you, that it's righteousness, isn't it? You feel that you're right. And there's also the way that Twitter rewards you for likes. And honestly, people do seem to like watching people being bullied. I'm afraid that this does seem to be part of human nature, and Twitter has allowed this to happen. I think, if you're in school or in your street or in work, you've got a range of opinions around you. And I think that sort of moderates you to some extent. I think you're aware that maybe your opinion isn't what the masses believe. But on Twitter, you're able to gravitate towards everyone who thinks the same. And I think you can be led into a false sort of sense of belief that you are absolutely right.
Okay. Thank you. Graham, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I feel like I was definitely in that group that Helen describes before I entered into the gender critical debate or the gender debate. I feel like I was too fond of every political opinion that crossed my head, and to be honest with you, it wasn't until I actually had to start questioning things I've been told, because I found out that when I saw the lies about people like J.K. Rowling and the LGBT Alliance and groups like this, I realized, I might have been lied to all this time. The people who I trusted, the people whose opinions I was perhaps echoing, I now realize, they're just like everybody else. They perhaps didn't have a clue what they were talking about. So funnily enough, the only thing that I'm proud of on Twitter in terms of my past or my activity on that site is the gender critical debate, because it's the only time when I was really going against the grain. So yeah, it's definitely a problem. I think we're still not really used to the fact that this is a massive change that the human race is going through. We've developed, you would almost call it a form of telekinesis, where we can tune into the thoughts of someone on the other side of the world, and we need to be able to kind of inoculate ourselves against ideas that may seem attractive but are often complete nonsense. If we don't do that, then this current wave of hate against feminists is just going to be the first of many of these types of things. So I just feel like we still feel like we have a handle on this new technology, but I don't think we do. I don't think we do at all. And it's not just a question of sorting that out with the tech companies. It's a question of sorting that out between ourselves as human beings.
Thank you. Lord Chair, that's if you want to move on.
Thank you, Lord Bishop. Look, that's very useful. We really are running very short on time. I think we've got time for one final quick question, which I'll take from Lord Griffiths. Lord Griffiths.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the helpful way you've enabled us to see clearly some of the things you've been through in order to arrive where you are now. As far as Helen's concerned, to hear someone with an accent roughly from where I come from in a particularly nice moment. It's how what public pressure can be put on, or where can we look to find a proper moderation, a proper enforcement of what we might all agree are wrong things in the area we're looking at. And the police comes to mind here. And you know, the role of the police over the last 20 years also perhaps needs looking at some stage, because at one point the committee was told that enforcing laws online is beyond the police's capacity. And at another time, we've heard from the Centre for Policy Studies that better police enforcement of the existing law was preferable to a new regime in which the regulator would largely rely on the platforms for enforcement. So we want more from the police can't do it. I mean, would you have any ideas in this area as to how to see the laws of the land, as it were, enforced? There is a supplementary question, we don't have time for it, about logging people who come vaguely near that, and it's held on the record for a considerable amount of time. But clearly, if laws are broken, they have to be enforced. Would you have any views about that, as far as the police's role?
Can I just say very, very brief responses, if you would, and then you may wish to write to us if you wish to add in anything further, and we'd be happy to receive
I'll just very, if you don't mind, Helen, I have actual experience of this because the police were called on me. Another charge against me is that the police were called on me. The police were called on me because I tweeted a link to a Sky News interview between a gender critical woman and a trans rights activist. The trans rights activist did not like the fact that I tweeted the link because he was humiliated on the interview. The next day, the police came and knocked on my door. So at the moment, what is happening, what is in danger of happening, is that not only are these activists empowered on social media, they in this particular case, you had the police acting as their reputation management team. You know, so I don't know about any solutions to this problem, but that's where it is at the moment, that you could have these vexatious reports.
Helen, any solutions?
I would suggest that actually, I think like the banks got independent regulation and changed out of all proportion. They did very well there. I would set up actually a regulatory body for this. It's too big to just hand over to the police. I think it needs to be a body that really, I mean, I think the police have a role in actual things that have broken the law, but we're talking about a lot more here. And I personally would look to a regulatory body, again, with transparency and accountability to enforce moderation, shall we say.
Okay, well, look, I'm afraid we need to draw this session to a close. The discussion we've had today is a really important session, because soon the government will be introducing legislation, online harms legislation, which is going to try to balance a duty of care for platforms towards their users with the requirement of them to have regard for free speech. What is clear from today's session is that is an incredibly difficult balance to draw. But we've explored some of the questions of detail which this committee will be considering, and which this committee will be taking further evidence on from witnesses, and in which we would welcome correspondence from anyone who is following the work of this committee to help us in our deliberations. Can I thank Graham Linehan and Helen Staniland for their evidence today. They are difficult issues, but we appreciate the time that you have given us, and the meeting is now suspended.